Thanks very much, and very warm welcome to our webinar today on driving B2B and direct-to-consumer sales through enriched product content and syndication. I'm Mike Smee from Sales Layer, and today I'm joined by Alexandra from Productsup, or rather Sasha as she likes to be known. Sasha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks a lot, Mike, for sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm the Associate Director for Industry Experts Group at Productsup. And my personal area of expertise lies on the B2B side, especially manufacturing, especially when it comes to PIM and product content syndication.
Thank you very much. So let's kick off by discussing some salient points around this subject. So first up, Sasha, can I ask you to share your thoughts on how the customer journey is changing? Specifically, what have you observed in the last couple of years, and what does this mean for brands?
Sure. I think the most interesting thing that's been happening has been happening on the B2B side, actually. And as I guess everybody understands, most organizations already had some sort of a digital transformation plan, and everybody kind of decided that e-commerce has to happen. But in many manufacturing organizations, that was a bit of an afterthought, and it wasn't really progressing as fast as it should have. And then COVID changed everything, because for most organizations, that was then the only real channel to sell anything was online. And you had to scramble together and implement things. So if COVID was good for anything, that was really for the digital transformation on the B2B side. And it also became quite clear that it's not that different, actually, whether it's B2B or B2C. And a lot of the learnings and the best practices already developed years ago on the D2C, B2C side could be implemented on the B2B side, and B2B buyers actually want pretty much the same thing as B2C buyers, but maybe with extra features for invoicing and that sort of stuff, but the buying experience is similar. And one of the more interesting hacks I've seen companies do is companies that are traditionally more in the B2B flow, hiring D2C digital professionals to bring that best practice and all this knowledge that they've accumulated over the years and accelerate things on the B2B side.
Very interesting. Yeah, really, really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly my experience echoes that as well. And as you mentioned, COVID massively accelerated the shift towards digital channels. And just if you look at the B2C side, if you look at the typical customer journey, the phases of the typical customer journey, particularly the early ones, if you look at like awareness, consideration, purchase, attention, advocacy, particularly in the early stages, the awareness and consideration phases, digital content has become more important than ever. What we did during COVID is we saw the decline of in-person shopping trends, and that to some degree has carried on in the post-COVID world. So that digital content has to effectively replace the salesperson. So quality and consistency of that content across digital channels is paramount. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm actually seeing. B side, brands that have employed more traditional interaction models are being forced to play catch up. Their consumers or their customers are demanding the types of experience that you see in the B2C world. I mean, some of the stories I could tell you about where some of the large B2B players are. I mean, we're certainly getting involved in projects where even significant B2B players have been managing, say, 100,000 SKUs in spreadsheets using traditional print catalogs, emailing PDF versions of those catalogs. And now they're finding that they don't have the foundation stones in place to serve those kind of digital world expectations. Right, so we'll just move on to the next point.
So Mike, the next one is for you to start with. So what is the role of product content in the pursuit of this perfect shopping experience?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm going to look at this in two stages, basically. Firstly, before we get to, product content as such, or stuff that you normally see on a product's details page within a digital channel, key to that perfect shopping experience is consumers actually being able to find their way quickly and easily to their desired purchases. So the product data structure and segmentation is absolutely key. For instance, marketplace and channel specific mappings, enhanced attributes and product segmentation, they all allow a higher ranking on marketplaces. And they also allow for the correct populating of things like faceted navigation, which can be fed from product data. It's all key to people finding their way to the product. And then once they get to the product details page, product data has to effectively, as I said earlier, replace the salesperson. So providing comprehensive, expanded, detailed specification and composition data, things like videos, visualization, peer validation via reviews, all these things customers are expecting these days. So this digital content plays a massive part in that perfect shopping experience. What about you? What are your thoughts?
So I agree with everything you've said, and I think if you follow the guidance given by Mike here in terms of what a good PDP looks like, that will be its perfect guidance, right? That is what it needs to be. But I would take it even one step further. So people tend to think often in separate PDPs on particular channels, but actually, if you think from the buyer perspective, they will interact with dozens and dozens of touch points before they make a purchasing decision. So you also need to think about how all of that content across different channels works together. And it can also be not just the B2B channels, your resellers doing something. It can also be your D2C channels. So it's really across the board. And this is a hard thing to control. So what effectively you need to do is to make sure you don't have discrepancies or inconsistencies regardless of the channel, and that all of that content works together properly. So you really need to control the full journey, which is a new thing. This explosion of touch points and explosion of online content is relatively new. So most organizations don't yet have a good best practice of doing that. And this is really now probably the hottest topic of taking control of this content on all of the different touch points, including those you do not control directly as a manufacturer. And I have a couple of tips for you of how you can get started on that. Big channels, they started offering things for manufacturers to be able to provide authoritative version of the content. So one example is Google Manufacturer Center, and there you can override, being a manufacturer, the product content for all of your products, even if the seller is actually not you, but some third-party reseller. So they would then keep only the price and the stock from the seller, but everything else will come from you. Amazon allows you to do similar things. So you would need to sign up as a vendor, but you don't actually have to be a vendor or sell as a vendor, but you can then provide content and override maybe subpar content put out by resellers, because in the end it's going to harm you. So you really should be controlling that.
Great, yeah. Great tips on how to kind of keep control of your content there. Indeed, great insights. Ones that I've actually seen in play amongst some of our own customers, very recently. So thanks for sharing that. So on to our next subject, which is around commerce anarchy. Now, commerce anarchy is a real struggle for companies when it comes to their omni-channel strategy. How can a company fight it these days? How can a company fight it? I mean, you've kind of mentioned something there, but what are your other thoughts? What insights can you provide here?
Yeah, let's make it very precise. So if we put it simple, what is commerce anarchy? Where does it come from? Essentially, it's a consequence of this explosion of channels and online touch points where things can be bought. And it becomes very, very difficult to control the content across all of them. And then you got anarchy. So what can a company can do? Essentially, it's a big thing that requires a rethink of how we do go to market for product data. In vast majority of organizations currently, there is not really a holistic strategy. It's going to be kind of case by case, by brand, by assortment, by team, by country. And there is usually not a single platform and not a single process for it. It's kind of reinventing the wheel every time when there is something going to market somewhere. And this needs to change. So organizations need to develop some sort of almost a factory approach, like the approach organizations have for products launching in the market. There is a checklist you have to go through, and there is a particular sequence of events, and it's always the same. This needs to also happen for product data. So there should be a holistic platform, a holistic strategy, and a single approach for product data to go out to market, regardless of whether it's B2B channels, D2C channels, whatever it is. Business model doesn't matter, because for the consumer, in the end, it's all the same. They interact with content, they make decisions. So I think this is really the biggest shift that needs to happen in organizations, and it's more even a cultural or a mindset shift rather than purely tech. Tech is the easy part. The harder part is understanding that you need to change the whole process.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, you know, again, I would echo that. You know, consumers are, of course, discovering, researching, buying products on more channels than ever. You know, the paths between products, services, consumers are increasingly complex and difficult to navigate and chaotic. And, you know, it is a huge challenge, you know, putting your arms around all this and managing that chaos. And, you know, I agree, holistic product content strategy is required. You know, the whole kind of idea of de-siloing and putting policies around the consistency of that is a real key cultural and organizational you know, move that is required to kind of get there. But, you know, I say you mentioned tech being the easy part, and to some degree it is. But obviously what you need is you need the proper tools to kind of implement and manage that mandate of consistency. Yeah. So looking to a solution, a company needs a single source of truth for product data that will be used to feed syndication to all those channels. I'm not talking here about a rigid, locked down, IT-orientated system that kind of shackles a marketing department, because you do see that, and I see quite a lot of that. But a collaborative enrichment tool, yeah, involving inter-team workflows, approvals, etc., making space for creativity to sell the product, but also applying appropriate governance, yeah. And this is something that is unquestionably best served by implementing a best-of-breed cloud-based PIM. So on to...
Which is actually a very nice segue into the next question. So Mike, how does a PIM platform and a B2C platform fit together? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to use an analogy, I would say that, you know, the one I often use is that they are players on the same field, they are parts of the same jigsaw. PIM provides the foundational elements, i.e., you know, the centralization, the enrichment, collaborative workflows, single source of truth. But then P2C then hyper automates the syndication of that to the entire commercial network. It's a bit like passing the baton in a relay race. That's the way I look at it. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a really good way of looking at it. I would maybe stressing in terms of what's important in the PIM, what's important in the P2C side. So for me in the PIM, it's really about the data quality. So it's super important to get data quality right in the PIM, because if the data and the quality of it is not there, there's nothing you can do on the syndication side, on the P2C side, if the incoming data is not good. So PIM is really about from a syndication perspective about data quality. Of course, there is a collaboration and all the other aspects, but for us, we really care about the data being correct and good. And then we can take the data on the P2C side and we can contextualize it and prepare it for every channel. And that can be just kind of simple things like meeting the character limits of different channels and mapping the attributes and preparing data in the correct format. But also you can really contextualize it and present the products in the best possible way for a particular context. So obviously things like Instagram is going to be very different from things like Google as a channel in terms of what people expect to see there. So you can really customize it and prepare it for the context of the channel. And then the other thing that's super important on the B2C side is automation. Essentially, you will see completely different level of maturity from the channel side. So the mature channels like Google and Amazon, they will offer APIs. And it's easy to automate things, but there will be tons of channels that don't offer any particular cool automated ways of connecting, and you still want to automate that. So it's really important also to make sure that the B2C platform can cover that regardless of what the recipient format is, that you're able to automate the full flow and you don't have a lot of potential for delays or manual error due to just manual process.
Great insights and completely agree. Fabulous. Okay, so many thanks. What we're now going to do is we're now going to move on to the next part of our webinar regarding exactly what PIM and P2C are, why you need them, what they do. And I'm going to start with the PIM side. So firstly, some context around PIM. I mean, any contemporary marketer will tell you that today's customers don't negotiate on being well informed around their purchases. if their experience is poor or the picture is incomplete, they just move on to the competition. It's usually just a click or two away. And recent stats from Forrester, of course, back this up. They expect comprehensive, expanded, detailed product information, peer validation, videos, visualization, all this good stuff. But brands are still struggling to meet those needs, to meet those expectations. Again, according to Forrester, 1 in 5 of US adults have returned online purchases, not because of them being broken or not fitting or for any more traditional return reason, but explicitly because the online product information has been misleading. And in order to deliver on those expectations, basically our product data needs to be usable and organized in a PIM. So, what is a PIM? What does a PIM do for you? Well, at a basic level, it provides 3 main functions. Firstly, what it does is it lets us organize our product data, consolidate it from multiple sources, from different suppliers, from different systems, like basic information from an ERP system, a mishmash of different spreadsheets, and then basically get it into that harmonized, single, clean repository. Then what it lets us do is it lets us enrich that base product content so that it's usable as a sales tool. I talked about the shackling of the marketing department, etc., through traditional kind of master data management type applications. What we can do here is we can create and populate new product attributes that were never there in the first place, but they might be essential in order to help us convert the sale, fit in with a marketplace requirement, or even adhere to legislation and regulatory requirements in certain regions. It also lets us hold this data in multiple languages if we're selling in multiple geographies. But once we have that central enriched single source of truth, what it allows us to do is it allows us to connect it directly to all our own channels, e.g. our brand websites, our apps, our digital catalogs, or extend that syndication reach via PTC technology like Productsup, which you, of course, Sasha, will be covering in a moment. But before we move on, I just wanted to say that a good modern cloud-based PIM will offer much more than these essential functions, like creating different levels of access and editabilities across different roles and different teams, along with workflows, facilitating full cross-organizational collaboration in content creation, enrichment, and approval. Also, though, the ability to analyze the data quality. We talked a little bit earlier on, you talked a little bit earlier about data quality, understanding where your product data is underpopulated, under-enriched, so that you know where to focus your merchandising teams in turning that product data into the most effective sales tool. It will also, a good cloud-based PIM will also let us append product records with things like spec sheets, videos, images, even things like device drivers and firmware updates for tech products can be added to that product data in a good modern PIM. Then what it lets us do is it lets us hyper-automate the outbound side, giving the ability to apply custom data mappings and transformation via business rules and formula, syndicating across your entire commercial network. Like I say, directly via own channels or extending the reach to third-party channels via P2C technology like Productsup, which is a great segue, I guess, into the final portion of the webinar. And I'll hand back to you, Sasha, to cover off the P2C platform.
Thank you very much, Mike. And yeah, speaking about the P2C side of things, maybe let's jump to the next slide. So the journey from supplier to buyer, from product to consumer, has become infinitely complex. So I can only echo what Mike has been saying. Our research also shows that majority of organizations struggle, and it's not an obvious thing to control all of this content that's going out into all of the channels. So essentially, there are more and more channels. This is going to continue for a while because e-commerce is it has been growing for a while, and there is no slowdown in sight. So it's going to grow for a while still. With that, there will be more channels and more complexity. And it's not just the number of touch points, but also the fact that it's a very dynamic environment. Retailers and the kind of last mile online shops, they all compete with each other, constantly tweaking data models, tweaking ways to attract consumers, which then reflects into the changes of requirements to those who supply content to them. So there are constantly changes across hundreds of channels that you have to keep track of, and this is not an obvious thing. So just to give you an example of how intense it can be, Amazon has a couple of changes to their data model per day. So it's really a lot. Let's go to the next slide. So commerce anarchy disrupts customer intimacy. So it's not even just about the online world where it's harder. It's a given that we're on the operating in the online world, but also due to the number of these touch points and the almost inevitable consequences of having content that's inconsistent or even contradictory across touch points, especially if you're a kind of business where you have tons of distributors or resellers with their own online shops putting out content that might be outdated, that is super common when people are a bit lazy to maybe refresh as fast as they should be. So that is almost inevitably going to happen unless you have implemented the fully controlled P2C strategy. And then once you lose those customers because they've encountered inconsistent content, they were not too sure, they didn't trust the product anymore, they bought a competing product. Then getting them back is also going to be harder because of so much noise and so many channels and so many competitors. It's really, really hard to get attention of the buyer. And unless your competitor messes up as well, it's really, really hard to get that buyer back. Let's go to the next one. So what is needed is essentially to avoid those discrepancies, inconsistencies, and to really control your product content online. And we touched on that previously. So the way you can do it is you need to rethink your product data go-to-market approach. So it needs to be a consistent approach across countries, across geographies, across brands, across channels, even across B2B and D2C, which tend to be somewhat siloed in many organizations. The product data go-to-market has to be controlled from the same place, and ideally you want to have the same platform underlying it so that you don't have to do the same thing over and over again with some minor changes while you go through that cycle. Let's jump to the next one. So what is it exactly that we talk about when we say P2C strategy or P2C platform? So if we wanted to simplify the market to the kind of minimum useful picture, then it would be what we're looking at on the screen. Essentially, you have manufacturers that produce the products, and that's where at least part of the content originates, at least for the functional attributes of the product. Then they would have, in majority of cases, a traditional flow where they sell to B2B channels such as wholesalers, distributors, and retailers, and then those eventually sell it to the end buyer, who could be a consumer or could be a business. Majority of manufacturers now also have a D2C channel where they sell directly to the end buyer, and that can happen on third-party marketplaces as a 3P seller, or it can be in their own e-commerce shop. Let's jump to the next one. So all of this is P2C. P2C essentially just means taking product content from wherever it originates with the manufacturer through all the loops and hops in the chain out to the final consumers of that content. So depending on who you are, whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor or a retailer, it will look a bit different for you. So a different part of this chain will apply to you, but ultimately all of that is P2C, and you need to have a strategy for all of these different channels that will vary depending on whether you are a manufacturer or a distributor or a retailer type of company. Let's go to the next one. So I wanted to show you what the reference architecture looks like for a properly implemented PIM and P2C platforms. So this is kind of a maximum possible scenario for all sorts of channels. For majority, it will be a subset of this, but I think it's a really good representation of what that looks like. So the two key pieces here are the PIM, sales layer PIM you have on the left, and the Productsup platform you have as a step after that. So first of all, you want to have your product content collected and prepared within the PIM. That's your single source of truth for product content, and where you're going to maintain it. Then the next step after that is that you can then take that content into the B2C platform like Productsup and start adapting, contextualizing it for every channel. Productsup is also going to consume content from systems like ERPs or product portals maybe, or depending on what you have internally, for additional content. Usually that would be stuff like pricing, like stock, shipping data that doesn't typically live in the PIM. In some organizations it could be, in many it wouldn't be. But for the syndication to the channels, you would often need that information. So that also has to come into the P2C platform. And then on the channel side, we would be preparing the content to syndicate it out to all sorts of channels. On D2C side, it would be primarily advertising feeds. So if you have your own online shop, you want to drive traffic to that online shop so that people buy things there. And for that, you need to do tons of advertising online. So that would mean primarily search and social, depending on what type of business you are. But for sure, you're going to be doing tons of Google and tons of Meta. So Facebook, Instagram, all the Meta ecosystem channels. And you need good advertising feeds for those channels. And here you really are playing with big money. Many companies have big advertising budgets, and you need to do these feeds properly so that you can produce a good return on ad spend. The other type of D2C channels you would have would be third-party marketplaces where you sell as a seller. So that would be, examples would be something like Amazon Seller or eBay. And you also need to prepare the content and contextualize it for those channels. On the B2B side, we would be talking about retailers and the marketplaces that allow the wholesale model or 1P model. So that would be Amazon Venda, but also Walmart, RS Components, and so many others, depending on your vertical. And if you're more on the industrial side, especially, you will also have tons of data pools that would be feeding your distributors in various markets. And there you also need to supply content, also very, very precisely in terms of how it's classified, and all the technical attributes have to be correct. So this would be kind of your whole view. And then last but not least, super important is that there will be learnings coming from the market. So you will learn from those channels and what works, what doesn't work, what sort of content you need to have. And it's important to take that feedback back. So these little green arrows we have going back from the channels to the Productsup platform and eventually to the PIM is to indicate that we also will be probably evolving the model in the PIM eventually and the model in the P2C platform in order to have all the content in the way that it's useful to make your sales on the channels. And then let's jump to the next slide. Yeah, so what can you achieve if you do this well, if you have this IT stack and the processes around it and the strategy implemented? So what you can look forward to is then consistent buyer engagement across channels and across time. You don't lose clients, and hopefully you also gain some market share. Redefined product and brand experience, no more inconsistencies. And eventually a buildup of knowledge and best practices, because you always have the same go-to-market process for product content, and you don't reinvent the same thing over and over again, making the same mistakes across, different brands, different geographies, and so on. And with that, you regain control of your products and your brand online. You turn this immense complexity in the market into a source of competitive advantage for yourself. And this is really, really important, because it's not such a simple thing to do. That effort is worth it, because your competitors would not be able to catch up super quickly, because it really takes a bit of thinking to build this out, and it's going to serve you for a couple of years at least. So it's nothing that kind of gives you an advantage for 2 weeks. It will last. And with that, you overcome commerce anarchy, and you can drive sales and gain market share in your segment. And with that, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, some great insights there. Thanks very much for sharing, sharing your knowledge with us. We're just coming up to the close of the webinar now, and we're quite tight for time. So just one or two quick questions which have come in. Anyone who has submitted a question, we will respond to that happily via email. If I can just pick a couple in the next couple of minutes. The first one I can see here is, how can you integrate the minimum amount of systems for product management in a hybrid model, B2B plus direct to consumer sales, for example? Yeah, I think that was probably quite elegantly actually covered off here with regards to the different systems and the integration points between them. You have the PIM feeding the P2C platform, P2C accessing ERP for stock availability and orders, and then of course what happens out the front here with regards to the different channels is very brand specific with regards to whether they use distributors, what own channels, marketplaces, advertising feeds, etc. Everyone will get access to this video, so you can of course refer back to that piece and the commentary there. Just a time for one more question, which I'm going to direct at you, Sasha. And this is, in your experience, are customers engaging with different digital touchpoints in the same way, or are they looking for different content?
Okay. Yeah, so the answer is it's definitely different content, and you have to customize to the channel. So one thing we mentioned briefly previously was a difference between Google and Instagram, for example, as advertising channels. So on Google, you would notice as a consumer also that it's a super kind of factual, not very emotional type of thing. When you do a product search, you get like a product image on white background, very, very strictly mandated what can and cannot be on it. And the reason for that, it's a search environment. So people are already searching for something. They already know what they want to buy and they just want the facts. But on Instagram, you are likely trying to find customers for a product that are not necessarily looking for such a product, and you can get them excited, and you need lifestyle images, and you need kind of more beautiful images that fit into the Instagram feed a bit better. Another example could be, for example, I think this is also super familiar from the consumer perspective in fashion. If you compare Zalando PDP with the product display page of the brand on their own D2C shop, Zalando is going to be super minimalistic. So they have this concept where they provide the absolute minimum of content that would be required to make a purchase, because they are trying to drive quick decisions and not overwhelm people with too many things. But brands typically on their own websites, they have a different strategy, and they try to build intimacy, and they try to show all the cool things they do on sustainability and materials and all the additional things that allow a consumer to get excited about the brand. So it will look super different, and you have to be aware of that, and you have to for sure customize to the context of the channel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I say I'm just conscious of time. We've overrun by a couple of minutes. As I say, we'll make sure that everyone gets an answer to their question. So I say this concludes our webinar for today. Please do get in touch if you'd like to find out more either about PIM or about P2C. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.